enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, and that's why I go with the most current. I
I
want
want
to
to
know
know
how
how
they
they
define
define
words,
words,
because
because
that's
that's
the
the
definition
definitions
they
they
are
are
going
going
by.
by.
Okay?
Okay?
Remember,
Remember,
a
a
dictionary
dictionary
changes
changes
with
with
time.
time.
All
All
dictionaries
dictionaries
do.
do.
Dictionaries are
Dictionaries are
basically
basically
the
the
common use of the words and the common understanding and the common meaning of the words. They're not necessarily, it's not a logical or a set in stone kind of, it's not like a mathematical formula where the word is structured this way so it has this meaning. It's not absolute, okay? It is an interpretation. I mean, a fag in England ain't the same thing as a fag here, okay? And I don't mean that in derogatory sense, but it's two words that have two completely different meanings, and we both speak English, supposedly, okay?
Right.
All
One's
right.
a cigarette and one is something else. Okay,
Well,
that makes sense. Thank you.
uh-huh. Alrighty. A surety. This particular definition is a noun, okay? A person who is primarily liable for the payment of another's debt or the performance of another's obligation. Although a surety is similar to an insurer, one important difference is that a surety often receives no compensation for assuming liability. A surety differs from a guarantor who is liable to the creditor only if the debtor does not meet the duties owed to the creditor. The surety is directly liable. Okay, so when you walk into a courtroom and there is a U.S. fiction on trial, what is your relationship to that fiction? You're the surety. Okay, so when Wesley Snipes walked into court against the IRS and started making claims that I'm not the vessel, I'm not the fiction, they just sat there and went, you're incompetent because you don't realize you're the surety for it. Okay? The his trial about him talking about the vessel, I don't know if that's on audio or not. Definition number 2, a formal assurance, especially a pledge, bond, guarantee, or security given for the fulfillment of an undertaking. So can a bond be a surety? You remember last week we discussed admiralty? Did we discuss how in admiralty you always have to put up a bond to release the vessel? Okay, the bond becomes the surety. See, we're in Admiralty Maritime. When they arrest the vessel, it's to get the responsible party to show up. And guess what? If you're the vessel, you show up. Okay? But if you put up a bond, you've even heard of bail bonds, right?
She is coming on to talk with us, give us an update about what's going on with all the money. And we're going to talk about some of the missing money and in the media and how they pulled a real game on Dr. Mark Skidmore and everybody else and all of us watching this, trying to make us think that it was all phony. But I want to start, well, first of all, Catherine, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg. I really look forward to talking to you, given everything that's happening.
Yes, I'm going to go full screen here just so people can read this better. I brought this up in my weekly news wrap-up. I have full screen on me, I think. This is about Russia buys quarter of world yuan reserves to shift from the dollar. I'm just going to read you a few headlines. What it should have said was they sold $100 billion worth of U.S. assets to shift into the yuan,
Right.
yen, and the euro. And then this BIS warning. This is bizarre that these big financials warning of seizure at the heart of the world. This was a UK story in December. And then just this year, World Bank warns of storm clouds. IMF warns. And then you have Alan Greenspan, my favorite. Run for cover. Run, Forrest, run. What's going on? Why are all these big institutions warning? Why is Russia dumping dollars? Why is this happening right now? What's up?
So since the financial crisis, we have depended on more and more debt. So we've expanded the debt dramatically, particularly in the emerging markets, to keep globalization going. Globalization has really depended on significant infusions of debt. Now the U.S. is bringing their money back, reshoring, and you see tremendous amounts of friction in the global economy. The local firms are pushing back against the multinationals, so massive amounts of friction, a rebalancing with China, and the U.S. is putting on more and more aggressive tactics to try and basically protect the dollar, while Russia, China, lots of countries are creating the liquidity mechanisms they need to go around the dollar. So you have a lot more tension, fighting, and friction in the economy at the same time that everybody needs more money to cover the debt. And so you really are moving into what is probably going to be a recession, both in the United States and globally. You know, the U.S. has been relatively strong as that money comes back in. So I think everybody's getting ready to batten down the hatches as you see more competition in the global economy, and you see the danger of a dollar bear trap in the emerging markets. Sorry about that. Let me just... That wasn't supposed to be on. Sorry.
Okay. That's all right. So we'll just
Okay.
continue. So we'll just continue. We've heard about this reset. We had Jim Sinclair on saying that this Russia story, them dumping the dollar, $100 billion, which is a lot for them, and getting into
Right,
the
but
yuan.
the Russians have been creating alternative liquidity systems and moving out of the dollar for a long time and moving into gold for a long time. So this is simply an acceleration of what Russia's been doing for almost 10 years. I was with the Russians came to the 2005 GATA Gold Conference and were doing due diligence on moving major amounts of reserve positions then. So this is a long-term trajectory for Russia. China's been more recent in terms of moving their reserves, but this is a natural progression of the rebalancing that we've known since the bailouts was going to happen.
Are we going to get to a point where we get a new dollar? Are we going to get to a point where the president comes on some Sunday night and says, hey, don't worry, which is when you should worry, and we're going to get a new currency. We're going to have the debt, which is not payable. We're not paying this debt back. None of this debt's getting paid back. Are we going to get into a position where we get a reset of the U.S. dollar, which is, in effect, a reset of the debt?
Well, there are many different things that could happen. I think it's impossible to say. Right now, if you look at what's been happening with the changes in the infrastructure of the federal financial system, we're watching very big moves to completely re-engineer how the federal government implements and handles transactions. And the question is, once the bankers have that in place, what are they going to do and how are they going to do it? I mean, make no mistake about it, there's no reason for the federal government to default or monkey with any debt because they can literally print the currency. The question is, how do they make sure that whatever they're printing really holds any kind of store of value? And I think the reason you're seeing them re-engineer the federal bureaucracy and financial transactions infrastructure is because they want a much greater and tighter control of that infrastructure when they do whatever they do, including just continuing to debase the currency. They could do this entirely just by debasing the currency in theory.
So you don't think there's going to be some big, Sinclair says we're going to have a succession of resets. That's not just going to be one big one. It's going to be the one with the Russian thing was the beginning of the first one. Other people are saying that the reset they're saying that a reset is happening right now as well. That's what you're saying. Basically, we're getting a reset.
Well, but
right
we've been having an evolutionary reset for 20 plus years, I would say. But I think Jim's probably right that if you are going to reset, you're going to do a sequential step function. I think the important thing is not what happens in terms of how they adjust the currency, because the currency is losing market share pretty steadily, and that's part of part of the concern is if you look at what the Chinese and Russians are doing now, it's not as big as it may sound. But if you look at the mechanisms they're putting into place, the numbers could get very big as they sort of go up that S-curve function of making that change. But I would say the thing to focus on is not worrying about what's going to happen to the currency. What is important is what is happening to how the infrastructure of the U.S. government and its legal infrastructure is being re-engineered. Because what we're watching with FASB 56 is essentially a coup. So now we've had a financial coup. Now we're watching a legal coup to consolidate that financial coup. And what I would keep my eye on is what is happening to the fundamental governance structure of the U.S. Because the important thing is not what they do. The important thing is who controls when they do whatever they're going to do. Who decides? Who's in control? Because that's what determines what they're going to do. It's who's in control, because then they get to decide. So I would right now, the number one thing, if I was an investor invested with a big treasury position or any stocks that are highly dependent on the U.S. federal government or mortgage securities highly dependent on the U.S. federal government, I would want to understand who controls and how are they controlling, because now we've created a mechanism for them to control entirely in secret and create policies entirely in secret, completely including around the back of the U.S. president.
Explain FASB 56.
Okay, FASB stands for the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, which was created under the George H.W. Bush administration when Nick Brady was Secretary of the Treasury and Darman was OMB. It was three organizations: the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, the Treasury, which is now dropped off, and the General Accounting Office, which respects Congress. We've had a process that you've covered very well and deeply, Greg, for several years, where what has come to the fore is there's $21 trillion of undocumentable adjustments at the federal government, the so-called missing money. And we've seen all sorts of games with the government playing games, refusing to answer legitimate questions about that $21 trillion, taking the documents down on the website. Then when they discovered that we already had them, putting them back up, producing statements that are supposed to explain the $21 trillion when every number in it is redacted, saying, don't worry about the problem, we're going to do an audit. Then, oh, well, I guess we failed the audit, even though we spent almost $1 billion on doing the audit. So there's been a whole progression of the government doing the dance and the shuffle on their refusal to obey to the constitutional provisions on and the financial management laws about, for example, producing audited financial statements. So the question was, how do they deal with this once and for all? My guess is you probably saw some of the leadership at Treasury, whether it's Brady, Rubin, Summers, sit down. Wouldn't surprise if they pulled Volcker in as well, and say, okay, how are we going to fix this once and for all? And the decision was to produce a statement from the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, a private group of accounting experts who advise the government, to come up with a policy that authorizes the federal government, in complete defiance of the Constitution, in complete defiance of the financial management laws, to basically move certain things behind secret books. So the federal government, including all the covered agencies and up to, I think it's 156 related agencies, are now permitted to keep secret books, and we're not allowed to know who makes those decisions, by what process they make it. All we know is they can have secret books, which means that the books we see are, frankly, totally meaningless.
And that's FASB 56. FASB 56 is that ruling? Is that recommendation to the government?
Right.
FASB 56.
So let me suggest, because I think it's very important for investors to understand the real legal detail on this. I had one of the law firms who works for Solari Report write a full piece on FASB 56. And if you go to our website, you can link to constitution.solari.com, or you can go directly to constitution.solari.com. And there's a full briefing for any serious investor on what FASB 56 is, but also we have several pieces on whether the Constitution, the financial management laws, or the black budget laws, all the different legal infrastructure and history of the law related to federal financial reporting and management of federal